The quiet truth behind his eyes? The room was almost silent, except for the faint hum of cameras being adjusted. Keanu Reeves sat there, hands folded loosely, his eyes reflecting a kind of calm that only people who have lived through both light and shadow can hold. It was one of those interviews where no one expected a confession, yet something about the air that morning felt different, heavier, as if it carried a truth waiting to be spoken. The reporter asked him gently, "Keanu, people often say you never open up about love. Is that true?" He smiled, but not the kind of smile used to hide emotions. It was the kind that revealed them. And for a few seconds, he didn't answer. The pause stretched. The audience leaned forward, and every heartbeat seemed to echo in the room. Then he said quietly, "Maybe it's because the one person I've always wanted to talk about is the one I've never wanted to hurt." The sentence landed softly, but its weight was enormous. The reporter hesitated before asking, "Are you talking about Sandra?" Keanu lowered his eyes and nodded slightly. No one expected that answer. The entire room seemed to freeze. A few gasps were heard, and even the cameras, though still rolling, seemed to tremble in the silence that followed. He took a deep breath and continued. "We met when we were younger, before the world got too loud, before fame turned every whisper into a headline. She was kindness in motion, and when you see that kind of light in someone, you don't rush toward it. You protect it, even from yourself." His words carried the kind of sincerity that no script could ever reproduce. And behind that, honesty was a quiet ache. The ache of years spent holding something precious without ever daring to call it his. The reporter leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. "So you're saying you were in love with her?" Keanu smiled again, his voice softer now. "Love is too small a word for what I feel. It's respect, admiration, and a kind of peace I only found when she was around. I never wanted to break that peace." The audience watching from home would later describe that moment as one of the most human things they had ever seen. It wasn't just a celebrity talking about love. It was a man who had carried silence like a burden, finally allowing it to breathe. His calm voice carried a quiet storm beneath it. And for the first time in years, Keanu Reeves wasn't the mystery man Hollywood adored. He was just a person who missed someone deeply. Then he said something that would melt millions of hearts around the world. "If I ever marry," he whispered, "I'd want it to be her. Because no one has ever made silence feel so peaceful." The room erupted in gentle applause, but Keanu's expression remained humble. He wasn't saying it for attention. He was saying it because after so many years of restraint, his heart needed to tell the truth, not for the world, but for himself. After the interview, Sandra Bullock, who was watching from her home, sat frozen on her couch. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed his words. They hadn't spoken much in recent years. Life, projects, distance, all the invisible walls that fame quietly builds had kept them apart. Yet hearing his voice say those words felt like time had folded in on itself. She remembered their days on set, the laughter, the inside jokes, the way he'd always make sure she ate between scenes, the quiet comfort of knowing someone truly saw her. But mixed with that warmth came a flood of emotions she had spent years keeping under control. Regret, nostalgia, and something that felt dangerously close to love. She whispered to herself, "Why now, Keanu?" And a tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She reached for her phone but hesitated. What would she even say after all these years? And was it fair to reopen a door they both had learned to walk past? Meanwhile, the internet exploded. Clips of Keanu's confession spread across every platform. Millions of people commented about how genuine he was, how real the moment felt in a world that often fakes emotion for attention. But deep inside, Keanu wasn't thinking about the noise outside. He was thinking about one person, whether she had heard him, and whether she understood that after all this time, nothing had really changed. That night, he sat alone in his quiet home. The lights dimmed, a single candle flickering on the table. He looked at an old photo, the two of them smiling during the filming of their first movie together. Their faces were younger, but the connection in their eyes was unmistakable. He whispered softly, "I still remember that day, Sandra. The way you laughed at my terrible joke. I didn't know then that I'd carry that sound for the rest of my life." Outside, rain began to fall against the window, each drop tapping like a heartbeat. Keanu leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Somewhere deep within, he felt a shift, as if something long buried had finally found the courage to rise again. And though he didn't know it yet, this small act of honesty would soon change everything. Not just for him, but for both of them, because while Keanu was finally learning to speak, Sandra was beginning to remember how to feel. The message that changed everything. The night was long, and the city outside Sandra's window seemed quieter than usual. She stared at the screen, the faint blue light painting soft shadows on her face. The message had only one word, yet it carried the weight of years. Keanu. Her heart stuttered. It wasn't a random text. It wasn't spam. It was him. After so many years of silence, the name she had once whispered into dreams appeared again, breaking through the layers of distance time had built. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly above the screen. For a moment, she thought it might be a prank, maybe someone pretending. But something about the simplicity of that single word felt real, genuine. She opened the chat. There was no profile picture, no long introduction. Only another short line followed. "I hope this number still belongs to you." Her breath caught. She replied, "It does." Then nothing for a full minute. The silence felt endless. Finally, another message appeared. "I didn't mean to make things public. It just happened. I spoke what my heart wanted to say for a long time." She read the words slowly, each one sinking deeper than the last. I spoke what my heart wanted to say. For years, she had wondered if he ever thought of her. Now she knew. She typed back. "I saw the interview. It was beautiful, honest." Then paused. Deleted it, retyped. "You didn't have to explain anything." He replied almost instantly. "Maybe I did. Not for the world, but for us. I wanted you to know I never forgot what you meant to me." Her throat tightened. She turned off the phone for a few seconds, afraid that if she read any more, all the feelings she had buried would rush back with a force she couldn't control. But when she turned it back on, his message was still there, glowing softly like a quiet truth that refused to disappear. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The rain began again, slow at first, then steady. She walked to her balcony and watched the drops fall against the glass, thinking of the man who had always carried storms in silence. She whispered softly, "Why now, Keanu?" In another part of the city, he sat on his couch, holding the same phone. He stared at her last message, rereading every word, wondering if he had crossed a line. It wasn't planned. He had gone to that interview to promote a film, not to confess a decade of emotion. But the moment her name came up, something inside him had broken free. His old friends used to tell him that closure was a myth, that time heals. But Keanu knew the truth. Time only teaches you how to hide pain, not erase it. And he had hidden this one well. Every movie, every red carpet, every lonely night after the lights faded. She had been there in his thoughts. He never spoke it, never dared to show it, but her presence never left him. He typed again, "Do you remember the day we wrapped Speed? You hugged me before leaving." I wanted to say something then, but I froze. Sandra smiled faintly as she read it. "I remember," she wrote back. "You looked like you were going to say something, but you didn't." "Yeah," he replied. "I didn't trust myself to speak. I was afraid I'd never stop." Her eyes filled with tears, but she laughed softly through them. That was exactly how she remembered him. Gentle, hesitant, sincere. She had met many people in the industry, some loud, some polished, some complicated. But Keanu was none of those things. He was simple in the rarest, purest way. A man who could say a lifetime of things with silence. She wanted to ask him so many questions. Where had he been all these years emotionally? Had he moved on? Why now? But she couldn't bring herself to turn this fragile, beautiful moment into an interrogation. Instead, she asked softly, "Why did you finally say it, Keanu?" His answer came after a pause. "Because I realized silence was just another form of running away, and I'm tired of running from what's real." That single sentence broke something inside her, the same wall she had built to keep him out. And in that moment, she realized he wasn't just talking about love. He was talking about life, about everything both of them had endured. Loss, loneliness, grief, and the quiet ache of pretending to be fine when the soul is tired. Their messages stretched for hours. The rain turned into a storm, the night into dawn, and still they spoke. They talked about memories, about old laughter, about the people they used to be. Sometimes their words were deep and heavy, sometimes light and teasing. It felt like rediscovering a rhythm they thought they had forgotten. By morning, Keanu wrote, "I'll be in Los Angeles next week. Maybe we could meet." Not for the cameras, just us. Her heart raced. She wanted to say yes immediately. But years of caution made her hesitate. The media would explode if they saw them together. The rumors would spread again. She didn't want to become a headline. But then she remembered the way he had spoken, not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a man who still believed in something pure. She typed slowly, "If we meet, no press, no noise, just you and me." He replied, "Always." 3 days later, Sandra arrived quietly at a small cafe near the hills, one they used to visit after long shoots back in the 90s. She wore a simple cap and glasses, no makeup, hoping not to be noticed. When she stepped inside, he was already there, sitting in the corner, sipping coffee. He looked up as she entered, and for a second the world around them disappeared. He stood up immediately, the same humble way he always did, and smiled. That quiet, genuine smile that once made her laugh without reason. She walked toward him slowly, almost as if her feet didn't trust the ground. When she finally reached him, they didn't say anything at first. They just stood there, smiling softly, eyes searching for the years they had lost. He spoke first. "You look the same," he said gently. She smiled. "You don't. You look wiser." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Or just older." "No," she said. "Wiser suits you better." They sat down, and for a while it was like stepping back into an old dream. They talked about everything and nothing, how life had changed, how fame had taught them patience, how loneliness had shaped them into quieter versions of who they once were. There were pauses, but not awkward ones. They were the kind of silences that felt full, the kind that exist between people who understand each other without needing to fill the air. Then Keanu's expression turned serious. "You know," he said softly, "after all these years, I thought I'd let it go. But when I saw you again, I realized I never did." She looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "Maybe we both didn't," she whispered. The cafe was almost empty now, sunlight spilling softly through the windows. He reached out, almost unconsciously, and gently touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm to meet his. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried everything they had left unsaid for decades. The world outside kept moving. Cars, people, noise. But for them, time had stopped. And in that stillness, something began to heal. As they stood to leave, he smiled faintly. "You know what I said in that interview?" "That you'd marry me?" she teased, her voice warm. He laughed, embarrassed. "Yeah, that." She leaned closer, her eyes soft. "Be careful, Reeves. Some promises have gravity." He met her gaze. "Then let it pull me in." They stepped outside, the wind carrying the scent of rain still fresh on the earth. For the first time in years, both of them felt a strange calm. Not because they had figured everything out, but because they had finally stopped running from the truth. And yet, just as they reached their cars, a camera clicked from a distance. Neither of them noticed, but that single photo, taken by someone hiding behind a parked car, would change everything by morning. The storm after the silence, the next morning began like any other day for most of the world. But not for them. Keanu's phone started buzzing before sunrise. First it was one message, then 5, then hundreds. By the time he opened his eyes, his notifications were already overflowing with missed calls, interviews requests, and articles that used his name in every possible way. He sat up slowly, his head still heavy from lack of sleep. For a moment, he didn't understand what was happening. But then he saw it. A photo of him and Sandra outside the cafe, their hands almost touching, their faces lit with a kind of calm that only the truth can give. The headline read, Keanu. Reeves and Sandra Bullock on love rekindled after decades of silence. He sighed deeply. Not in anger, not in regret, but in quiet frustration. This was exactly what he wanted to avoid. Their moment had been private, sacred even, and now it was being dissected by strangers looking for headlines instead of hearts. He knew how this world worked. Every emotion was a story, every silence a scandal. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sandra sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through a flood of messages from friends, reporters, and fans. Her publicist had already called 3 times. "We need to release a statement," the voice insisted. "We can't let speculation grow." But she didn't answer. She wasn't thinking about statements or rumors. She was thinking about that moment at the cafe, the way Keanu looked at her, the peace she felt just being near him again. She didn't want that memory to become a performance. It was real, and she wanted to protect it. As the hours passed, social media exploded. Millions of people shared clips of their past movies together, quoting lines, posting fan edits, writing captions like they were always meant to be. Some meant it in love, others in gossip. But deep down, both of them knew, no one could truly understand what lay between them. In the middle of the chaos, Keanu called her. "Hey," he said softly when she answered. "You saw it?" "Yeah," he replied. "I didn't want this. Not like this." "Me neither," she said, her voice tight. "But maybe it's not all bad." He was silent for a moment. "What do you mean?" "Maybe," she said slowly, "the world just caught us being human." He smiled faintly. Her calmness had always grounded him. She could turn a storm into a lesson. "Still," he said, "I don't want this to hurt you." She laughed softly, not out of amusement, but warmth. "Keanu, I've faced worse than a headline. If this is the price of honesty, I'll pay it." But even as she said it, she felt a flicker of fear. She knew how quickly affection could turn into invasion, how a private truth could become public entertainment. By evening, both of them were trending in every country. Reporters waited outside their homes, some even camped near the cafe hoping for another glimpse. Rumors spread faster than facts, that they were secretly engaged, that they were moving in together, that they were planning a film about their own love story. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter much in a world hungry for stories. Sandra's team finally convinced her to issue a short statement. She agreed, but only if she could write it herself. It read simply, "Keanu and I have shared a deep friendship for many years. What you saw was a genuine moment between 2 people who care for each other. That's all." She refused to add anything else. No explanations, no denials, no dramatic tone. Just truth in its simplest form. When Keanu read it, he smiled. "That sounds like you," he texted. "Good," she replied, "because I'm tired of sounding like someone else." Later that night, he drove quietly through the city streets, trying to escape the noise. His car radio played softly, but his mind was louder. He kept replaying their conversation, her calmness, her strength. For years, he had admired her from a distance. Now, for the first time, he realized he wasn't admiring. He was learning, but fate, it seemed, wasn't done testing them yet. The next morning, his studio called. The tone was polite but sharp. "Keanu, this media storm is affecting promotion. We need to keep your personal life separate from your professional image." He replied calmly, "It's not a scandal. It's a friendship." The voice on the other end hesitated, then said, "The public doesn't always see it that way." He ended the call quietly, but his expression darkened. He had seen this before, how kindness was twisted, how simplicity was treated like confession. Still, he wouldn't let anger win. Not this time. That evening, he met Sandra again, this time in a quiet park after sunset. No cameras, no reporters, just them sitting on a wooden bench under a dim streetlight. She was wearing a hoodie, her hair tied back. He looked tired but peaceful. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired of noise." "Me too." For a while, they just sat there, listening to the rustling of leaves, the distant sounds of the city fading into the night. It reminded them of who they used to be, two people who could find comfort in silence. Then Keanu turned to her and said quietly, "You know, I meant what I said that day." She looked at him. "About what?" "About wanting to marry you?" She froze. His voice wasn't playful. It wasn't a line or a memory. It was present, real. "Keanu." She began, unsure how to respond. He continued, "I'm not saying it for attention. I've lived long enough to know what's rare and what's real. You've always been both." Her eyes softened, but she shook her head gently. "We live in two worlds, Keanu. Your calm doesn't hide you from the chaos around us." He smiled faintly. "Then let's create our own world." She looked at him, searching for hesitation, but found none. In his eyes there was only peace, that same peace that had once drawn her to him. And for a brief moment, she believed it might be possible. But just as she was about to answer, a bright light flashed from behind the trees. A camera, then another. She turned quickly, her heart sinking. Someone had found them again. Keanu stood up instantly, stepping slightly in front of her as another flash went off. "Let's go," he said quietly, guiding her away. But as they walked briskly toward his car, voices started shouting in the distance. "Keanu! Sandra, are you together now?" They didn't answer. They just kept walking. When they finally reached the car, Sandra exhaled shakily. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." He looked at her gently. "I know, and I'm sorry." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. It's too much." He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand again, but he stopped himself. The weight of the world was pressing too hard this time. When he dropped her home, she hesitated before getting out. "You've always protected me," she said softly. "But maybe this time we both need to protect the truth instead." He nodded. "And we will, together." As she stepped out of the car, the streetlights flickered faintly against the night sky. She looked back once before closing the door. The look in her eyes said everything. Love, fear, hope, and something unspoken. That night, neither of them slept. Keanu stayed up reading through countless articles, not out of vanity, but because he wanted to see how the truth had been reshaped again. And somewhere between the noise and the headlines, he found a video. Someone had recorded that brief moment in the park when he said, "Then let's create our own world." Millions had watched it already. The comments were filled with people saying, "This is what real love looks like." But love, Keanu thought, wasn't in the words or the image. It was in what came after, in the silence, in the choices, in the storms they would have to face. And as dawn broke, a quiet realization settled in his heart. This time, if he wanted her to stay, he'd have to fight for her in a world that didn't understand quiet love. The secret that time tried to hide. The morning light crept gently into Keanu's living room, but his mind was far from gentle. He sat motionless, holding his phone, staring at the message that had just arrived. "We need to talk. Not about us. About something that could change everything." The words felt heavy, almost trembling with hidden meaning. He read them again and again, wondering what she could possibly mean. He typed a simple reply. "When and where?" Her answer came within seconds. "My place. Tonight. Please, come alone." The rest of the day passed slowly, each hour stretching like a quiet drumbeat inside his chest. He tried reading, tried working, tried pretending that the world outside wasn't watching him. But his thoughts kept circling back to her, her voice, her calmness, and now her urgency. When night finally came, he drove through the empty streets, headlights slicing through the soft fog. He reached her home, a quiet, secluded place surrounded by trees, the kind of house that seemed to keep its own secrets. She opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been standing there waiting. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something inside for too long. He noticed the faint sadness behind her calm smile. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "You said it was important," he replied. "It is," she whispered. "Come in." They sat in the living room. A small fire burned in the fireplace, the soft crackling filling the silence. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Keanu, I need to tell you something. It's not easy. It's about the past, and why I distanced myself all those years ago." He nodded, saying nothing. He wanted her to take her time. She looked into the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "After we finished the lake house, I got a letter." "A letter?" he repeated quietly. "Yes," she said. It wasn't signed. It was from someone inside the industry. It warned me that being seen too close to you would damage my image. It said that people were starting to spread stories, that I was using your kindness to build mine. He frowned slightly, his jaw tightening. "That's ridiculous." "I know," she said. "But back then I believed it. The pressure was different. I was at a point in my career where every little rumor could cost me work, and I panicked. I didn't want to lose everything I'd built, so I pulled away. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told I had to." She stopped, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought it would protect both of us, but all it did was create distance, and the more I stayed silent, the heavier it got." He leaned back, his eyes steady but gentle. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She looked down. "Because I was ashamed. I let fear decide for me, and you always moved with grace. I didn't want to be the one who brought you chaos." The room went quiet except for the faint sound of rain starting again outside. Keanu stared into the fire, his thoughts turning over slowly. Part of him wanted to be angry, not at her, but at the world that had made her believe kindness could be dangerous. Another part of him just felt sad, for the years they had lost, for the silence that might have been avoided. After a long pause, he said softly, "I wish you had trusted me then." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I wish I had too." He stood up slowly and walked to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've learned something over the years. Love isn't about timing. It's about courage. And we both ran out of it when it mattered most." She stood too, moving closer to him. "Maybe we can find it again," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. There was no noise, no cameras, no history, just two people standing in the quiet space between regret and hope. But before he could speak, her phone buzzed on the table. She ignored it, but it buzzed again and again. She sighed and picked it up. Her expression changed as she read the message. "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him, her face pale. "It's from my publicist. Someone leaked that letter." "The one you just told me about?" She nodded. "They're saying you wrote it." Keanu froze. "What?" "They claim you tried to manipulate me," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "That you wanted me to distance myself so the story would make you look like the humble one. The man who never chased fame." He stared at her in disbelief. "That's insane. You know that's not true." "Of course I know," she said quickly. "But they're making it sound real. There are fake copies of the letter circulating online. People are saying you tried to control my image." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Who would even do that?" "Someone who wants attention. Or money," she said quietly. "The industry has people who profit from chaos. Maybe it's just another trick to stir headlines." He nodded slowly, his calm returning. "We can fix this." She shook her head. "It's already spreading. They're saying you're not the man everyone thinks you are." He gave a faint, sad smile. "That's nothing new. People have been saying that all my life. But what hurts is knowing it's you they'll drag into this too." She walked up to him, her voice firm now. "Then we tell the truth. Together. No scripts, no press statements. Just you and me on camera telling our story. He hesitated. You sure about that? The world doesn't always reward honesty. She met his gaze steadily. Maybe not, but I'd rather lose with truth than win with silence. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pride and sorrow. You've changed, he said softly. No, she whispered. You just reminded me who I was. They spent the next few hours talking, planning how to face the storm. For the first time in years, they were united not as actors or icons, but as two people who had learned the hard way that silence protects nothing if it costs the truth. The following day, they agreed to appear together in a live interview, raw, unedited, and completely unscripted. As night approached, Keanu sat alone in his car, parked outside the studio where they would speak the next day. The air was cool, and the city lights shimmered faintly through the mist. He looked at his reflection in the window, older, quieter, but still carrying the same sincerity that had once made the world love him. He whispered to himself, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand." And somewhere across town, Sandra looked into her bathroom mirror, rehearsing what she would say, though she knew words might not be enough. She took a deep breath and murmured, "This time, we do it right." Outside, lightning flashed faintly across the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. It felt symbolic, as if the storm had finally arrived not to destroy them, but to wash away everything false. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, both of them in separate homes whispered the same word before sleeping, together. The truth that silenced the room. The studio lights were blinding, and the air inside felt too still. Outside, hundreds of cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, and fans gathered behind metal barriers holding signs that read, "We believe in them, and real love never hides." But inside, there was only quiet tension, the kind that lives between truth and fear. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock sat side by side, just a few inches apart, yet the space between them carried the weight of 20 years. Neither of them wore any makeup for the interview. No stylists, no rehearsed smiles, just two tired souls ready to stop running from their own story. The host, a well-known journalist, adjusted her mic and smiled politely. "Thank you both for agreeing to this. I know it hasn't been an easy week." Keanu nodded slightly. "Thank you for having us." Sandra smiled faintly, her hands resting calmly on her lap. "We just thought it was time to stop letting others tell our story." The host leaned forward. "The internet has been flooded with claims that Keanu wrote a letter years ago asking you to distance yourself from him, that the letter was manipulative, that this was all a staged romance. What's the truth?" Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look, the kind of wordless understanding built over years of silence. Keanu spoke first, his voice steady but soft. "The truth," he said, "is that there was a letter, but I didn't write it. It was sent to Sandra by someone pretending to be me. Whoever it was wanted to create distance between us, and it worked. We lost contact for years because of it." The host frowned. "So you're saying someone forged your name?" "Yes," he said simply. "Hollywood has strange shadows. People benefit from stories that aren't true. I didn't know about the letter until a few days ago when Sandra told me." The host turned to Sandra. "And you believed it was from him at the time?" Sandra's voice softened. "I did. I was young, and the industry was cruel to women who showed vulnerability. I thought keeping my distance would protect both of us, but it only made us strangers." There was a pause, a silence that felt almost sacred. The host shifted slightly, sensing the sincerity in the air. "And now?" she asked gently. Sandra smiled. Not the practiced one from red carpets, but something small and real. "Now I'm done with fear. If the world wants to call it love, let them. If they want to call it foolish, let them. I just call it honest." The audience in the studio, quiet until that moment, erupted in applause. It wasn't the usual excitement of celebrity gossip. It was something deeper, almost grateful. Keanu leaned slightly toward the microphone. "For years, people have said I'm private, maybe too private. But privacy isn't silence. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to speak. And this is ours. The host nodded slowly, her expression softening. What happens now? Are you both together again? Keanu looked at Sandra, his eyes calm but filled with meaning. Labels make things complicated, he said quietly. We're just two people who finally stopped pretending the past didn't matter, Sandra added softly. And maybe that's enough for now. The interview could have ended there. It would have been beautiful, powerful, safe. But the universe had other plans. The host hesitated for a moment, then said, We received something just before going live, a statement from someone claiming responsibility for the forged letter. Keanu and Sandra both turned sharply toward her. The air shifted instantly. What? Sandra whispered. The host unfolded a printed page. It's anonymous. It says, I was part of a management team at the time. I sent the letter to protect Sandra's image. I thought being linked to Keanu would make her appear too emotional, too dependent. It was a decision made for business, not for love. I'm sorry, the studio gasped. Sandra froze. Her breath caught as tears welled up in her eyes. For years, she had blamed herself, her fear, her decisions, her silence. Now suddenly the truth was different. She hadn't been weak. She had been deceived. Keanu turned to her, his expression unreadable, a mix of shock and quiet fury, but also an ache that had nowhere to go. He reached out instinctively and placed his hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away this time. The host, realizing the gravity of the moment, stayed silent. The cameras zoomed in slightly. Two hands joined, trembling but steady, framed against the cold metal of the studio table. Keanu spoke softly. We can't change what happened, but we can choose what comes next. Sandra nodded, tears falling now, unhidden. For years, I carried guilt that didn't belong to me. But maybe it brought us here. Maybe we needed the distance to understand what kind of love survives it. The audience was silent again. Even the crew behind the cameras looked moved. This wasn't acting. It was something far more human. The host cleared her throat softly. Thank you both for your honesty. Before we end, is there anything you want to say to each other and to the people watching? Keanu looked at her, his eyes calm and deep. Sandra, he said quietly, you once told me that silence was safer than the truth. Maybe that was true then. But now I just want to say this. If love ever finds us again, I won't let silence keep it waiting. Sandra smiled through her tears. And if it does, I promise I won't run. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the cameras still rolling, capturing a silence so full it didn't need words. The host ended softly. Maybe that's all any of us want. A chance to stop running. The screen faded to black. Within hours, the interview spread across the world. Clips flooded every platform. The moment of their joined hands became one of the most shared images in recent memory. Hashtags filled with words like truth, forgiveness, real love, respect. But amid the noise, neither of them posted anything. They didn't need to. They had said everything that mattered. Later that night, Sandra stood on her balcony, the city lights glowing faintly below. Her phone buzzed again. It was Keanu. She answered, and for a moment neither spoke. Then he said softly, You did good today. She smiled. So did you. Are you okay? He asked. I think, she said quietly, for the first time in years, yes. There was another pause, the kind that didn't feel empty. Then Keanu said, Want to take a drive? She laughed gently. You still do that? Disappear into the night? Only when there's someone worth finding, he said. Her heart warmed. Give me 15 minutes. And just like that, something shifted again. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. The final truth behind the shadow, the photo trembled in Sandra's hands. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart tightening as the inked words seemed to echo inside her chest. It's not over just yet. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, almost as if written by someone desperate or angry. She turned the paper over, hoping for a clue, but there was nothing. No name, no address. Only that shadowed figure standing behind her and Keanu in the picture. The air in her house felt suddenly colder. She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, the night was silent. No movement, no sound. Yet something inside her whispered that someone had been there, close enough to touch her door, close enough to remind her that truth was never simple in their world. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. It was Keanu. "Ready?" he asked softly. She hesitated before answering. "Keanu? Something happened." His voice changed instantly. "What do you mean?" "Someone left a photo at my door. It's from the interview, and there's a message on it." "What kind of message?" "It says it's not over just yet." There was a short silence. Then he said calmly, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. As she waited, she sat down on the couch staring at the photo again. She wasn't scared, not exactly. She was tired. Tired of secrets, of silence, of living in a world that punished honesty. When the doorbell finally rang, she didn't flinch. She opened it, and there he was, calm, steady, dressed in a simple jacket. His eyes searched hers the moment he stepped inside. "Let me see it," he said. She handed him the photo. He studied it for a long time, his brow furrowing. "This angle," he murmured, pointing at the image. "It's from inside the studio. Whoever took this wasn't a reporter. They were part of the production." Sandra felt a chill run through her. "You think it's someone who worked there?" "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe someone who's been following this from the start." He placed the photo on the table, then looked at her. "Listen, I don't want you to worry. Sometimes people do strange things for attention. It could be nothing." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel like nothing." He watched her carefully. There was no fear in her face, only exhaustion, the kind that comes from too many years of fighting invisible battles. He sat down beside her. "Then we face it together. No more running, remember?" She smiled faintly, the tension easing a little. "You always say that like it's easy." "No," he said softly, "but it's right." They stayed there for a while, silent, the flicker of the fireplace dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing against the windows like a whisper. Then suddenly, a memory flashed in her mind. "Keanu," she said slowly, "the name in that forged letter, it wasn't just your signature. It mentioned someone else, a name I never told you." He turned to her. "Whose name?" "Michael Wright," she said quietly. "He was part of my management team back then. He handled both our schedules for a short time. I thought he disappeared years ago after leaving the industry." Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. What if he didn't disappear? She pulled out her phone, searching for his name. There was nothing recent. No photos, no social media, just old press mentions from decades ago. But one small link stood out. A production assistant credit on a recent live show. Her hand froze. "Keanu," she whispered, showing him the screen. "He worked on the interview." He took the phone, reading the details. It was there, clear as daylight. Assistant producer, Michael Wright. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was sharp. The photo, the letter, the leaks, all of it suddenly connected. Keanu leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So he's the one who's been behind this, trying to control the story again. But why?" she asked softly. "After all these years, why now?" He looked at her gently. "Maybe because the truth threatens people who build their lives on lies." The words hung in the air, heavy but true. Sandra rubbed her temples. "I don't want to make this bigger. I just want it to end." He nodded. "Then we end it the right way, by not letting fear decide again." He picked up the photo and tore it in half. The sound was small but powerful. She watched quietly, realizing that for the first time she wasn't afraid of the noise outside. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll go public again, not to explain but to close the story ourselves." She smiled softly. "You and your quiet revolutions," he chuckled. "They tend to work." That night, they both slept for the first time in weeks. No interviews, no scripts, just rest. And in the morning, as sunlight poured into her living room, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. When they arrived at the studio again, the same host greeted them, surprised but calm. "Back so soon?" she asked gently. Keanu nodded. "We just wanted to say one last thing." They sat down together. The cameras rolled again, but this time there was no tension, no weight of fear. Just clarity. Sandra spoke first. Last night, someone tried to remind us that honesty has consequences. Maybe that's true, but so does silence. And we've lived enough years learning that lesson. Keanu added, "We don't want this to be another headline. We just want people to remember that truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's two people standing quietly, refusing to let lies define them." The host looked moved. "And the future?" she asked softly. Keanu looked at Sandra, a calm smile forming on his face. "The future," he said, "is simpler than people think. It's just choosing peace. With yourself and with the person who makes you feel seen." Sandra's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry this time. She reached out, placed her hand over his, and said quietly, "Then peace it is." The studio fell silent again, not from shock, but respect. No one clapped, no one shouted. There was only stillness, the kind that comes when something genuine fills the air. When they walked out of the studio together, the reporters waiting outside didn't rush them. Instead, there was a strange calm, as if even the crowd understood that something sacred had just been said. As they stepped into the car, Sandra turned to him. "Do you think we'll ever be free of it all?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Freedom isn't the absence of noise. It's learning to stay kind inside it." She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "Then I think we made it." The car drove off quietly, disappearing into the morning light. Two people no longer running from the past, but walking toward a future built on truth. Later that evening, far from the cameras, they sat on a quiet hill overlooking the city. The sky was painted with the soft gold of sunset. Birds moved lazily across the horizon. "You ever think about how strange this all is?" she asked softly. "Every day," he said with a small smile. "And yet," she whispered, "somehow it still feels right." "Because it is," he said simply. "We earned this." They sat in silence for a while. No words, no need for them. Just the wind, the fading sun, and the sound of two hearts finally at rest. And as the sky deepened into night, she reached for his hand and said, "You know, you once said if you ever marry, you'd want it to be me." He turned to her, smiling gently. "I remember." She squeezed his hand. "Then maybe someday, when it's quiet enough, you can ask again." He laughed softly, the sound low and warm. "I'll wait for the silence." And in that silence, under the slow-turning stars, their story, long misunderstood, long delayed, finally found its peace.